Hello everybody, so how we doing today? Alright. So, Taiwan president in U.S. after warning of threat from overseas forces. Oh yeah, that Taiwanese situation coming full ahead. Taiwanese President Tsai Ing-wen arrived in the United States on Thursday on a trip that has angered Beijing, warning that democracy must be defended and that the island faced threats from overseas forces, and a veiled reference to China. China? A veiled reference, appropriately veiled, because you don't want to be too forward with this. Because it could piss off a sleeping giant. China, which claims self-ruled and democratic Taiwan as its own and views it as a wayward province, has called on the United States not to allow Tsai to transit there on her overseas tour. Tsai is spending 4 nights in the United States, 2 on the first leg and 2 on the way back from a visit to 4 Caribbean allies. She began her trip in New York and is expected to stop in Denver on her way back. Shortly before Tsai was due to arrive at her Manhattan hotel, a Reuters photographer witnessed a brawl at the hotel's entrance between dozens of pro-China and pro-Taiwan protesters, which was eventually broken up by police. Thank you, officers, for doing your job. The New York Police Department was not immediately able to comment on whether there had been any arrests. Tsai was last in the United States in March, but her stops this time will be unusually long, as normally she spends just a night at a time in transit. The U.S. State Department has said there had been no change in the U.S. One China policy, under which Washington officially recognized Beijing and not Taipei while assisting Taiwan. However, analysts said that the extended stopover served to emphasize the Trump administration's support for Tsai at a time when she has been coming under increasing pressure from Beijing, a major U.S. security rival with which Washington has been engaged in a year-long trade war. Speaking for departure at Taipei's main international airport at Taoyuan, Tsai said she would share the values of freedom and transparency with Taiwan's allies. I was looking forward to finding more international space for Taiwan. You know, in my opinion, if a country declares that something that was once a part of it can't sever off, and they won't allow it, doesn't that strike you as just a tad arrogant and a bit of a toxic authoritarian attitude? Because that's what it strikes me as. It seems a bit tyrannical. If they want to leave, let them leave. If you're doing them good, then they might want to stay. It really doesn't matter. Taiwan is not China. Taiwan is its own place. And I would probably argue that Taipei is as well. Let mainland China be China and let the islands off the hook. If they want independence. I think they deserve it. Remember, we once declared independence from the British. That technically was illegal. That was treason under the Crown. So I think it would be pretty hypocritical of me to support the idea of the existence of America, which was literally born under what would be considered treason to some, and then not support the islands wanting independence from China, or hell, even Catalonia from Spain. If we had the right, so do they. Plain and simple. But anyway, our democracy has not come easily and is now facing threats and infiltration from overseas forces, Tsai said, without being specific. These challenges are also common challenges faced by democracies all over the world, she said. We will work with countries with similar ideas to ensure the stability of our democratic system. Caribbean stops. Taiwan has been trying to shore up its diplomatic alliances amid pressure from China. Taipei now counts only 17 countries as diplomatic allies, almost all Central American, Caribbean, or Pacific nations. Tsai will be visiting St. Vincent in the Grenadines, St. Lucia, St. Kitts, and Nevis in Haiti on her overseas tour. In New York, Tsai will meet with members of the Taiwanese community and UN ambassadors of allied countries. The State Department described Tsai's visit as private and unofficial and said she would be greeted in New York by James Moriarty, chairman of the American Institute in Taiwan, the de facto U.S. Embassy in Taipei. It did not respond when asked if Tsai would have contact with any other U.S. officials. Seeking to bolster Taiwan's defenses, the United States this week approved an arms sale worth an estimated $2.2 billion for Taiwan, despite Chinese criticism. Tsai, who was set up for re-election in January, has repeatedly called for international support to defend Taiwan's democracy in the face of Chinese threats. Beijing has regularly sent military aircraft and ships to circle Taiwan on drills in the past few years. Douglas Powell, who served as U.S. representative to Taiwan from 2002 to 2006, said Tsai's extended stopover showed U.S. approval for the caution and restraint she had shown in her dealings with Beijing. It makes sense to reinforce that with generous transit treatment, he said. This is also a message to China. The U.S. government believes Tsai is behaving responsibly in respecting the framework of U.S.-China-Taiwan relations. Overall, I would say that's true. While I would support Taiwan, Taipei, and even if Formosa wanted to break off, the islands, we have to be careful about how we would support them. And we wouldn't want to do anything that would piss off the sleeping giant of China. I mean, they have a large enough standing army and an economy that they could literally fuck us up pretty good. That is not something I would want to invite. So I think the general framework of relations is probably about the best we can do without making things worse. So for now, I would recognize that, hey, you know what? We're doing good. For now. For now, we are doing good. Powell said the Trump administration had yet to indicate a significant shift in the traditional U.S. approach to Taiwan, but this could change in the event of a deterioration of U.S. relations with Beijing. It's like an engine running at high idle, he said. Trump has not engaged the gears, but there is a lot of activity at lower levels seeking to upgrade relations, so change has not occurred in a big way yet, but it could happen any time with unpredictable consequences. So he's really kind of playing both sides here, Trump. He's seeking not to aggravate China, but still supporting Taiwan, which I think is a brilliant and smart move. Probably the best move he's made in the whole situation. Admittedly, there are parts I like of his foreign policy and parts I don't. And admittedly, this is a part I do like. Simply selling arms does not violate any agreements. It still acknowledges the One China law, which I see as sort of a protective measure. So while I do not support it in spirit, I have to be practical and say it's the best we can do. Now, what would happen if we got into an armed conflict with China? Well, I'll tell you what happened. Even if we won, we would suffer a major, major loss. And if we lost, well, that wouldn't change much either. Either way, we would be suffering a huge loss. And honestly, so would they. They're powerful, so are we. Even with a clear victory on either side, big losses are going to happen. It's best not to poke the bear. Anyway.